everyone. Hi to the online contingent. Welcome to the little group of in-person people. So this is the first IG meeting for research tools and data curation workflows. So we really want to have it be a discussion on what we want to do with this IG. So we'll have a couple talks, but then we'll move on to have more of a discussion session. So just a bit of housekeeping. There's collaborative notes if you want to add to those. For the online contingent, you can add questions to the Zoom chat. I've got my trusty iPad. I'll be monitoring some stuff there. And we'll have a shared Q&A after the free talks, and then we'll have a little discussion section. Yeah, so we'll start by introducing the IG, what we've done so far, how we've been created. Then we'll have free talks by my lovely friends, Xiaoli Chen and Felix Shaw, and then I'll do a little presentation as well. And then we'll move on to the discussion. So just to focus in on what the IG is trying to be about, it's really trying to be at the intersection of, you've got many different RDM and data curation tools that do many different things. And you've got the role of data curation at an institution and RDM. And what is the intersection between the two? It's adoption, maintenance, implementation, and so on. And that is what we're wanting to really think about, is how do we make sure that tools are implemented in a way that makes sense, that they support the actual workflows that we want, that all make sense. So this is just for reference if you want to have a look. But at the BOF, at the virtual conference beforehand, in the last 6 months, we had a few presentations on various approaches to RDM, which I'll just quickly show you a few slides. So we had someone, Nordshed, presenting from UIT and explaining, okay, what does curation look like? What does curation even mean at their institution? What tools do they use? And what are the kind of points of friction there? So you can see, for example, waiting for the depositor to make changes. One of the tools used is Patience, for example, but also Dataverse NO used across various parts because they are heavy users of Dataverse. Meanwhile, at KU Leuven, they have DMP checks and provide advice. What do they use? They use a DMP monitoring tool. For data selection, they don't use a tool yet. And so what does each of these steps actually mean, and what tools are used, and are they the right tools to be used as well? There's another example, and MDC used this nice little research data management lifecycle diagram, and you can see, okay, there are certain tools like DSW that's used for data handling, analysis, so on, and used actually throughout the whole process, but something like an electronic lab notebook and sample management system might be used in a few other slices. And so if you compare all of these, they all have slightly different interpretations of what the cycle is and also what tools they use. And we also had a presentation on institutions and collaborating with research tool providers and exactly how to make sure that tools fit the requirements of institutions and how to articulate that. So I recommend you check out some of those slides. So the IG was established in October 2024, which was very recent. That was just last month. The co-chairs are Alessa Gambardella, which has a role as the data steward at Leiden, Stuart Shiblumen, who is a PM at KU Leuven, at the institutional repository, and then me, who's based in Edinburgh. So you can see there's a European contingent for now. So we'd really be interested in hearing more from other people in different parts of the world. And you can see that there's also a diversity of kind of product management, data stewardship, dealing with tools, but also dealing with the actual data curation workflows. So yeah, the two action points that I'd like to reflect on is that if after the session you go, wow, this was a really good session, I want to learn more and keep up to date, you should join the interest group to learn more. But if you go, I feel like they didn't really consider some topics and there are some things missing, they could do better, you should also join the interest group so you can provide some feedback. Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, that's the page for AIG. You know where to find it. And so this is the kickoff meeting. So we'll have a few case study talks to just kind of get us thinking, little appetizers. And then we'll move on to more discussion, I have a little cheeky Menti prepared for you, so make sure you've got your devices. And yeah, we want to refine the interest group's focus and next steps. So yeah, so just to kind of get you thinking, try to articulate a few of the questions the IG wants to explore. So we could, for example, think about what are the friction points that make selecting, adopting, and maintaining research tools complicated? Are those people issues? Are those like technical issues? How do these interact? How can institutions and research tools better collaborate and communicate to ensure tools are used productively? How does the type of RDM performed at an institution affect the tools that they need and how they use them? And yeah, especially this one, I feel strongly about how do we facilitate understanding the exact needs of an institution and then customize those research tools and provide support for them in a way that satisfies the needs of that institution. Yeah, so let's move on to our few speakers that will provide us some food for thought. So we'll start with Xiaoli Chen, who will then share her screen. So we'll want to stop sharing on our side and just so she's able to click through the slides.
Hello.
Yeah, and feel free to introduce yourself and take it away.
Thanks, Vida. So everybody can see my screen already, I presume, and hear me all right.
Yeah, could you just try doing the presenter mode again, because it's showing the top bar again.
Is it okay that I show the top bar, because this is like the presenter mode?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's fine. If it has your notes, yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the opening and introduction, Vida, and thanks for inviting me to share a little bit from the perspective of the Fair Workflows project that I'm leading from DataCite. I'm at DataCite. So I will come at this from a person identifier point of view. I think like PIDs are a infrastructure kind of underlying a lot of these activities around around data curation and the results of this curation happening behind this research data, the metadata that go into the curation. Some of them, or a lot of them, land in the PID infrastructure that's made things more open, more discoverable, and being like openly available for various different tools to make use of, which is really what we want to make the most value out of research data curation. And yeah, I will start with a little bit of introduction about DataCite. I will presume most of the room and most people online are quite familiar with what DataCite is. We are a global nonprofit membership organization working now with over 3,000 data or like scholarly resource repositories in the world to provide DOIs for like these entities. Yeah, they come from over sorry about not updating the slides properly, like over 3,000 repositories from more than 300 members in 51 countries. And we have this community of member organizations have registered over 60 million DOIs to identify various different sources. Yeah, like as you can. Hello? I hear a lot of echo. Is it just me?
Yeah, I think it's turned up now.
Okay, so it's good now. I can continue. Yeah. So like this, at the inception, it was aimed to do research data, as in DataCite, to make research data like citable and available and traceable. And now we have expanded, and as the use case from the community emerge, like the DataCite DOI can cover mostly any kinds of scholarly resource, right, outside of data themselves. So we can talk about like preprints, audio, visual, images, study registrations, which is like one of the most recently added resource type that are covered in the dataset metadata schema, and also awards that covers research funding or scholarships, stuff like that. Just to answer the community requests and demands that we hear. And DOI's DataSite or Crossref that we're familiar with is like part of a wider person identifier system network. That there's also PIDs for researchers that ISNIs used to be mostly ISNIs and now mostly ORCID IDs, and also for institutions and organizations like ROAR, these open PIDs systems talk to each other, work with each other, and get integrated into the wide array of research tools that is used either in research processes or research management processes or publishing and deposition processes, which kind of link back to the topic of this session is all of these tools and services and platforms that we gather in this particular interest group. These are form this layer that intermediates all aspects of research work. So like from the researchers to research administrators to research managers, like PIs who are overlooking publication processes or approval boards or peer reviews. All of this works will rely on the support of various tools, and different levels of curatorial work happens in all of this in-between processes and valuable information to the entity and this outputs or this object that is being worked on. So it's crucial to capture this key provenance information, like that is that happens, what kind of change happened, from whom, at what time, this kind of information in the PID metadata, when in the end, like PIDs being created or being updated or being used in research or archival or preservation processes. And these, what I'm talking about, relies primarily on the tools and services to optimize their integration and streamline this curation workflows. So curators can very easily make these information explicit or even automated. So like whenever there are changes, that log goes directly into the system and made available in the metadata behind the PIDs. So as I mentioned, I led the Fair Workflow project, which just entered its 4th year. This was originally a 3-year project. Now we have an extension of 2 years to validate the previous workflows we have formulated. And so in the project, one of the key component was to build a series of integrations among different research tools that is used in an entire end-to-end research project lifecycle. So from the grant application process to grant registration, data management, planning, research designing, experimentation, and then output sharing, preprint submission, and then to the final article publication. So like all of these processes kind of go through a series of tools. Like in reality, it's probably a lot more complicated, not a lot more, not streamlined or linear like what was shown on this slide. But like this was a proof of concept, which like prompt us to work with all these partner organizations to create to build PID integrations, to create the PIDs to make that particular artifact created or worked on in their platform something that of a tangible output that is shareable and citable. And this is either creating that metadata record or enriching the metadata record, or making this integration between system more robust. So that's different types of integrations we have done. And with this integration in place, what the resulted view, or like one way to present what happens after when these integrations are in place and all of the metadata comes through and the linkage comes through, the curatorial work have taken shape, is like a comprehensive like overview of the entire research project. It's like on the metadata level, right? On the identifier metadata level. And you can see all of the project itself and the key metadata around the project with the description, the creator, contributors, funder, registration information, and then all of the outputs that is deposited or shared on different platforms and in different forms, worked on by different people, all aggregated in one place. Because they are linked through their metadata, and this metadata extracted from all of these different platforms. So that's what we how we want to think about how these research tools can support these PID integration. They can integrate the PID creation workflow to make this output openly discoverable, and then connect outputs either created on the same platform or from other platforms. We have this mechanism to allow this connection on the metadata level and ingest metadata from person identifiers, so allow users to import a resource through giving it a POI, and or like enrich the metadata record behind identifier, so contribute these provenance or connection information in the record. So we have been at this, I've been advocating a lot for these type of integrations. So for tools to support these functionalities, and a number of tool providers have taken action and formulated a lot of integration mechanism to support these workflows. And we do run a data registered service provider program to allow these integrators to come together and talk to each other about their integration, what type of workflows they support, what type of resources they support, and how we can work together to make these integrations work smoothly and efficiently together. So a little bit of a plug for the registered service provider program that I'm co-running with our adoption manager at DataSite. Welcome other tools who are interested to join us. I think that is, the end of my presentation. Just as a starter. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll go to the next talk and then take questions after all of them. So Felix, feel free to share your screen and take it away. I've been told that there's very fancy animations, so expect great things.
I think you're building it up too much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, all good.
And can you see my cursor moving by any chance?
No, I think your screen isn't visible just yet. You might need to try again to reshare.
Maybe that. Okay.
Yeah, we can see that.
And can I go to presentation mode? Okay, right. So yeah, thanks for the invitation. So my talk is going to be about COPO, which is the brokering service that I've been developing here for a number of years now. So my name's Felix Shaw. I'm a research software engineer. I'm the lead developer of COPO, which stands for Collaborative Openomics. And it's a data and metadata brokering service. So just to, I'm sure I don't have to teach anybody in this audience about FAIR, but very quickly I shall just more to sort of help myself than anyone else. COPO was developed in response to the FAIR principles, and they are that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So if we have a study, that study will contain some data. which as far as a computer is concerned is just a bunch of ones and zeros. And to make it useful, we need to label it, okay? And we need to put it somewhere where people can get it. So we put it in a public repository. It then becomes accessible. And if we label it with some metadata, it then becomes findable. So we have hours of daylight and location. So these are named columns which describe the data, okay? As human beings, we can easily figure out what these strings of characters mean. Computers can't do that so easily, so we have to use better labels, okay? So here we have now ontology terms which describe the columns of data and some of the values. So these now become interoperable data, okay? So we could take these columns and add them to a different data set with the same column heading, and a computer would then be able to understand what's going on with this data set. And putting all these things together, we get something that's reusable. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we're trying to do, okay? So part of my job then is to talk, so all of what I just described relies 100% on metadata. So metadata is entirely crucial in describing data and making data useful, both now and in the future. So part of my job is what I just describe as the manufacturer of consensus. So I have to talk to lots of different people who each have a different and yet necessary perspective on what makes good metadata for a particular data type, okay? So I talk to taxonomists, computer scientists, clinicians, curators, bioinformaticians, technicians, project managers, amongst others, and try to form a consensus of what a particular metadata set for a particular data type should be. And this is a really painful job. And so I've recently, over the last few years, worked with two large consortia, one called the Darwin Tree of Life and one called the European Reference Genome Atlas. And these are both pan-European and UK-based biodiversity screening projects, essentially, to try and produce, the lofty goal is to try and produce reference genomes of every eukaryotic species, which is obviously kind of, a bit of a stretch goal, you might say, but it's going quite well. But it took nearly a year to actually produce a template sort of schema for collecting that metadata. It takes a long time. So, like I said, I'm the lead developer of the brokering platform Copo, which is an online platform for brokering different types of data, so image, sample data, genomic data, so reads, assemblies, annotations, and other kind of sort of miscellaneous documents to public repositories. And we ensure the fairness by validating the metadata that accompanies such data objects by validating their metadata against these sort of community-derived standards. So as a kind of 1,000-foot view, Copo works something like this. So we have, for instance, read data, which can be easily uploaded into the Copo VMs. And we also have manifests, which contain this community-derived metadata. The user will fill out the manifest, upload this into Copo, which then each row of the manifest will reference a particular data file or files. Crucially, this then gets validated, and this tends to be kind of an iterative process where, we validate for lots of things such as, data types, missing data, defined vocabularies, whether or not dates are in the correct format. Sorry, my phone's just gone a bit mad. Lots and lots of different rules that we run over the metadata to ensure that its quality is sufficient to fulfill these principles of fairness. Once that's done, we then submit the data to whatever repository is appropriate. And all of the APIs, all of the accessions. Sorry, I'm just going to silence my phone. It's going a bit mad. Right. Yeah, so then all of the accessions, metadata, etc., are then available via the Copo API and also via the repositories as well to anyone on the internet. And also from that metadata, you can get to the data itself. Okay. So yeah, in a nutshell, we try to ensure the quality of metadata that accompanies data to make things more compatible, discoverable. Also, in this day and age, there's a big emphasis we have on producing machine learning training sets, as you're probably aware. Most supervised machine learning algorithms rely heavily on labeled data. So yeah, this particular mechanism is a good way of making labeled data. And all of this ultimately should encourage reusability. So some of the use cases we have, so yeah, like I said, we have the Darwin Tree of Life and the European Reference Genome Atlas. Between these two, recently in the last kind of 4 years or so, we've brokered sample metadata and some data for around 60,000 different samples, all collected from the wild. We also handle all of the research data management for my institute, the Elam Institute, and we also service just the research community in general. We deposit genomic data to the ENA. Sample data goes to the biosamples database, image data to the bioimage archive. Miscellaneous documents go to EUDAT, B2Drop, and we also support institutional CCAN instances. Okay, so in practice, what does that look like? Our URL is https://copo-project.org. And if you go there, this is what you're confronted with. You can either choose to submit data, so this is the live service, or try the demo, and it's exactly the same as the live service, except that everything goes to demo versions of the repositories. So I'll very, very quickly just show you kind of, what depositing some read data, for instance, would look like using Copo. So you would log in using your ORCID ID, create a new profile with the plus button, give it some high-level study metadata. This is what would appear in the submitted data to ENA. If you have any particular genes that require locus tags, you could put them in here. This will look different depending on what type of user you are. So we have different groups depending on the different projects that we service. So yeah, it's kind of tailored to individual users. Your profile then looks like this. We would then upload some files. So you click on components, files. There's two ways of getting data into Copo. You can either use the just normal sort of web-based HTTP, uploading the data from your laptop, but by far the more useful and common way of doing it is to do it via command line, so you can upload data from a cluster, and the vast majority of our users do this. So you would click on this icon here, and then we have this instruction. So navigate to your files, run an ls command, and paste the results into the box, and then click process. So we do that. So these are our files. Type ls -f1, get a readout of the files that I want to transfer to Copo, copy and paste them in here, click process, and it gives us a long curl command with kind of all the associated security gubbins and this and that that's required to make things work. You copy and paste that into your terminal window and press enter. And then there's either a long or a short wait, depending on how large your files are. And it transfers the files through to the Copo VMs. And then you'd see them here, right? So these are obviously quite small. So you have the file name, when it was uploaded, and its size. Okay. So now we need to actually apply the metadata to that data. So we would go back here, click reads, and then we choose the most appropriate checklist for our data. So these can contain sample metadata, essentially. So these are maintained by the ENA, and we would choose the most appropriate one for most of our users so far is Tree of Life. So that looks something like this. So you end up with a manifest file with all of the metadata. This is just a short subset of the metadata. It goes off to the right for quite a few tens of fields, and this kind of so this is a biodiversity-based metadata manifest. So it has lots of fields to do with samples and where they were collected and how they were preserved and the sort of taxonomic hierarchy of them, who did what, what experimental processes such as how the insect or whatever was dissected and dissociated or crushed, and all these other little sort of details which describe the experiment with this kind of rich metadata. Okay. Once that's complete, you upload it to Copo, and with some degree of there's a sort of cycle of validating and fixing because this never works first time and there's always things that need correcting. So after a while, when it fails, it'll tell you like which cell is invalid and why it's invalid. So you then fix the spreadsheet, re-upload, and do it again and again. And eventually it will validate, and then you can be sure that your associated metadata is of sufficient quality for a submission, and that looks like this. So each of the rows of this table represents a sample and its associated files. And then to submit it, you simply highlight it and then click the submit button. And it takes a little while, so it will compile all of the sample metadata into the required formats for whichever repository it's going to, in this case ENA, and make the submission for you. And then we can see we have the accessions here. So this is like the PRJ accession, which is the main accession for ENA. And then you can go away and you can do your publication and quote this. And then in the background, it will, over the sort of coming hours, it will transfer your data from the Copo VMs to ENA, which can, take a long time, but it all happens in the background. So you can go away, use this PRJ number. I think every 24 hours, ENA ingests the new data that's been submitted to it. And so within 24 hours, you can then come back into Copo and set the status of the submission to public, and then it's open to the world. So that's like a brief sort of overview of how you do a submission for reads in Copo, and we also do submissions for assemblies, annotations, some degree of image submissions, and others as well. So yeah, I just have a few thanks to my colleagues. And I think, are we taking questions now, or not sure? Anyway, I'm finished.
Oh, thank you so much. I liked all the step-by-step screenshots for like a demo of how exactly someone would use that. That was really cool. There's one more talk, which is me. I will try not to take too long. It's just gonna, we can just share the screen again, and just go back to where we were. Yeah, cool, perfect. Yeah, so I don't think I actually introduced myself, which I should probably do. Hi, I'm Vida, and I work at RSpace. I do product management. My background is in computer science, but also design and other things. So I like to think about the intersections between things. Currently thinking about fair samples. So how do we make an end-to-end sample workflow fair by integrating all the tools along the way? And I'm also thinking about vertical interoperability. So there's tools that do different things. So let's say if you have different DMP tools, them interoperating is one thing, but how do you interoperate between a DMP tool and a research platform and a sample collecting platform? What does that look like? And I forgot my clicker, which I accidentally made fall onto the ground. So we will see whether it works. Awesome. Yes, so what is RSpace? We are an open source interoperability platform for institutional research data management. So that's a lot of very long words. What does that actually mean? There's an electronic lab notebook component, there's a sample management system, and then there's all the integrations with tools that people already use and that exist in the research ecosystem. So rather than reinventing the wheel, we try to make sure that all those tools connect nicely in a fair workflow. So just to give some examples of what do we mean by interoperability? So the thing I was just mentioning before, in different stages of the research process, you have different tools and there's already work being done to interoperate between them. So say DMP tool and DMP online, they share a DMP roadmap code base. So the API work to integrate between one, similar to the other. Repositories have some similar-ish metadata, ELNs as well. But what happens when you want to interoperate between the different tools? Because if someone comes in and does some work in planning and creates some data, creates some metadata, someone comes in active research, maybe also creates some data and some metadata and so on, how do we make sure that all that information continues on and is passed throughout this whole process without much effort from the person themselves? You know, they do it once and they don't need to think about it. Oh, I forgot I had that in there. Yeah, so this is a complex graphic to show all the different things we integrate with, but when it comes to vertical interoperability, we can think about, say, data management plans. If you can pull those into RSpace, you do your little active research there, you write up your experiments, you treat your samples. Maybe some of the samples come from Fieldmark, which is an offline sample collection tool. So you record that metadata and then you push it into RSpace. You link all those things together. And then when you push things to a repository, all those connections are made. And one example of that is the thing we do with DMP tool, where if when making a deposit to Dataverse, you say, okay, actually all this data is related to a DMP, and so it's data that needs to comply with that DMP. Well, when the Dataverse DOI is generated, that DOI gets passed back to RSpace, which knows that there was a DMP that was associated with it. So it passes back that DOI to DMP tool. And in here, you end up in a little section called Other Works Associated with this Research Project. You have that Dataverse DOI. So the user didn't need to go back in and find the DMP and upload this link because we already know that those things are associated. And interoperability isn't just about research data management workflows. Research workflows also kind of can be handled in the same way. So I was mentioning Fieldmark, the offline sample metadata collection tool. So if you, let's say, collect some metadata at the very start of the research process, let's say you're in the fields, you're able to collect GPS location, you're able to collect things that you can't collect afterwards, you can only do that in the field. Well, it makes sense for all of that digitized metadata to be passed through and maintain all the format of the metadata and not lose anything. And how are we trying to do that? We're working on that just now. It's taking the kind of core Fieldmark fields, so things like geolocation data, specific dates or specific notes or other identifiers, and just mapping that so that once you have a bunch of samples in Fieldmark, you can just say, okay, push to RSpace, and you have all those samples available with all of their metadata for you to work on then and do your experiments in the next stage. So what are the challenges in doing this work? There's many of them, but I'll try to kind of cover just a few. The focus I kind of want to take is the project we did in implementing IGSN IDs, which are a material sample pit. And so we built a little system so you can directly register, edit the metadata, and publish an IGSN ID from your sample management system. So you already have a sample and you just click, okay, register IGSN ID, and it's associated with that entity in our space. And so we collaborated with DataCite, which you heard about earlier, and some user research with agricultural and field research institutions. And even though the project was about implementation, it ended up being quite a bit about, well, what are the difficulties in developing integrations? And there's a DOI of a very nice report, if I do say so myself, that we wrote. So one of the main things was, and this was mentioned as well by Felix earlier and Xiaoli, ensuring shared understanding among stakeholders is really hard. There's a lot of people involved, and even the people you think are maybe not that involved, they actually end up being relevant and one step in the process. There's maybe the research tool or a PID integrator. In our case, that was us. There might be an institution. That institution might use communities of practice to define their metadata. There's researchers. You might have other kind of governing bodies. And it can be really unclear who's responsible of what and what each person's role is. So I think on the next slide, I have examples like who hosts a landing page for a PID? And do we even have the same thing in mind when we say a landing page? Sometimes the institution thinks that they have to host it because, I mean, it's their samples. But as a service provider, us providing the PID system means that maybe we should host it. And initially I thought, well, DataCite provides the PID's registration service, so maybe they should host the landing page. And there's not that shared knowledge of how when we implement these things, how do they actually look like? There's questions like who develops the metadata schema. We can support people in making sure that our system provides the ability to customize a metadata schema, but we can't decide for them because we don't have the domain knowledge. So who does that? And also which tools should even update the PID metadata. Let's say you have, as I was mentioning many slides ago, if you have this, what happens if someone edits some metadata in our space? Should that be sent back to Fieldmark, or can we assume that once you push your samples forward, you don't really need to use Fieldmark anymore? Like, or you might want to kind of do it per field project. What happens if you update the data in a data management plan? You probably want to send all that information back and update things, but then you end up with a complex web of everything is integrated with everything else, and that's a lot of work to maintain everything. So how do you make those decisions? I don't know. Maybe you can figure that out in this interest group. And let me see if there's anything else. I don't want to talk for too long. And one reason why the IGSN ID project was quite successful is that for each entity, so institution, research tool, integrator, we had someone we could talk to and really dig their minds in terms of how things worked. And by having those extended conversations, we were able to clear up or even identify some of the kind of differences in understanding. So that was really important. But obviously you can't do that. You're not always fortunate to be able in that in that position in every project. So can we develop some kind of shared resource to understand the intricacies of this kind of work? And yeah, technical integration possibilities as well. If you're talking to people who might not have as much of a technical background or might have, I wouldn't say too much of a technical background, but might have an approach that focuses on that aspect, you might have, a lack of understanding of the same term, like a lack of a shared understanding of the same term. Yeah, and this is something that was mentioned yesterday, quite a few sessions, like the professionalizing data stewardship. IG is doing some work on that. And this is a very nice slide from Jean Wilbrandt about what does it mean to be, a data curator or a data steward, right? It's actually a bunch of different skill sets. So when you talk to an institution as a research tool provider and they tell you, oh yeah, like we want some kind of RDM system to support our data stewards, what does that actually mean? Like, is it to help them with their advocacy work? Is it to do with policies? Is there like a harmonization work involved? Is that just at the repository level? Does that happen before? And there's a need to almost be really explicit with what are the exact things you might want to help an institution with and what support do they need. But that involves knowing what to even communicate about. Yeah, and I'm wondering if using things like, say, a research data lifecycle model to facilitate conversations would be useful. So this is Maldreth, and so it's a research data lifecycle model that has harmonized various other lifecycle models into one cohesive one. But one distinguishing feature is that it also has mapped tools to each step of this process. So whenever you're looking at a specific stage, you can see what type of tools, an example of tools that correspond to that stage. So kind of going from the high level to the very kind of concrete. And I think this kind of framework could be quite useful to bridge the conversations between research tool providers and institutions in terms of what are we actually trying to tackle, what are the gaps that we're wanting to fill, what needs to interoperate. Let me see. Yeah, okay, still have a bit of time. Yeah, I think another thing that was quite successful is taking a very kind of user research, designy approach to working on the integrations. So talking to people and then writing up what we talked about, getting feedback from them, making sure we're on the same page, making mock-ups before developing anything, getting feedback again, and then each time you think, oh yeah, well, I mean, surely like we are all in agreement, and then turns out there's maybe one minor thing that actually is a major thing and that you need to edit. And this takes a long time, but actually saves time in the long term. So we made use of user stories. So just the usual, when I am in a specific situation, I want to perform a specific task so I can have some kind of result. So for example, when I want to locate or identify a sample, I want to read the label with a human readable ID or scan the QR label into the inventory system. And why do I want to do that? So I can have peace of mind that the sample can be identified even if the QR code gets damaged. Okay, that's very specific, but once you have that written out concretely like that, you can start prioritizing and figuring out how to implement that within your tool. Yeah, and various other things that we've already kind of mentioned. Standardized schemas can be very complicated based on domain, and the fact that if you're dealing with so many steps in a research process, each tool might have a different focus and might just naturally want to capture different information. There's a need for flexible and well-supported APIs, but there's the cost of each integration you build. Now you have to maintain. So which tools actually need to interoperate for the best bang for the buck? I find useful to have implementation examples, for example, like what Felix outlined in terms of the exact steps that were made and also the difficulties described, because it's easier to then figure out how would that work for us. And those kind of write-ups of the discovery process and then the actual resulting implementation are really useful and can serve as templates and also as ammunition. Oh, well, this institution did it this way, and it seems to be really useful. How can we do something similar? Yeah, and even if they're only prototypes, they're still really useful things to have. Okay, so that was a whirlwind tour. I know I speak fast, so we will move on to the Q&A. Yeah, so one thing I will ask the tech team is can you open the Zoom chat on here just so we can see if there's any questions? And I will also ask the room if there's any immediate questions for any of the free speakers. We can kind of start with that. Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Thank you. I have one question for Felix about the manifest for metadata in Copo. Can this be exported before the deposits so that you already have the template which you have to fill when you collect the data?
Absolutely, yeah. They can be. You can download the manifest template at any time. There's, I guess, one thing to be aware of is that sometimes they change. So if you download a template, fill it. So we have this quite often actually with the Tree of Life template, because that changes. There's like there's changes to it, say every 6 months or so. It's on a rolling cycle. So like fields get added sometimes. We try to avoid any field name changes, but if you download the template, fill it out, and then try to upload it, 6 months later or something, then there's a small chance that it would be invalid simply because the template itself has changed in that time. But yeah, for the most part, you can do what you say, download the template and use it as a kind of guide to your experiment.
Thank you.
So the question is for you. I was wondering, I saw in your list of repositories that you're connecting with for our space, you have specifically very generalist repositories, right? Are you connecting with them through a specific standard API, or do you also connect with domain repositories? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, one of the reasons we have done a bunch of integrations with the generalist repositories is because they have a fairly easy to use API that we can integrate with, and people within their team that we can easily contact for support. We are interested in supporting domain repositories, but it's about finding use cases and also finding domain repositories that have a strong API as well, because depending, I mean, we have, I think, looked at a few where there is a manual process involved and like a manual curation process involved as well, and we're not sure how that would then integrate within our tool. So we're definitely interested in those conversations. It's just a matter of how to design that, essentially. I think you might have a comment on that, Rory, as well.
Well, thanks. That's perfect. It's really a follow-up question to Felix, but following on that point, because this issue actually came up in a session that James and I were involved with as well yesterday, when someone from the NIH raised the question of, well, and it's come up at other conferences I've been recently too. So with all the support for development of the generalist repositories, it's now becoming quite easy to deposit things into generalist repositories. Actually, it's much more difficult to do that with domain repositories, some of which are very well funded and supported, but others of which won't. So kind of what's going to happen to domain repositories, and this whole issue is a really big one. And I was actually thinking about that. Thanks for your great presentation, Felix, when I was watching your presentation. And I was thinking about, if you imagine how a researcher can, either directly or through RSpace, how straightforward it is to deposit into Dataverse or Figshare. And then you describe the incredibly laborious process of trying to get something into an omics repository, which is what your brokering service provides. Are there ways in which if you had an unlimited budget and developers, in which Copo could become much more user friendly, and the process could be streamlined, or is that kind of really an insurmountable barrier?
So do you mean in terms of kind of reach? So like the breadth and number of repositories that we could submit to? Is that what you mean?
No, just looking at the process, all the steps that one has to go through to use the service, and then the verifying, the cleansing. I mean, it's all incredibly labor intensive, and so the result is very high quality, but it's very labor intensive. Whereas you compare that with, I'm just going to dump my data into Dataverse, boom, I can do that in 30 seconds or a minute. But clearly, are there ways in which, if you focused more on the interface and some of the things that you do might even need some computational expertise, or a kind of person who's not technical even do it. So is it possible to, would it be possible or would it be advisable to streamline the process for using Copo?
I mean, I guess, you know, it's always a toss up between what degree of quality do you want in your metadata versus the onerousness of depositing. So, I mean, there are a couple of things, I suppose. One thing is that, you know, there's various degrees of strictness that you can apply to those manifests. So you can say, actually, this checklist only requires you to fill out 5 fields, and there you go, you're done. But the utility of that metadata is then that much reduced. So yeah, you can draw a line as to how strict you're going to be on your validation. And then another thing that we find is that quite often we have sort of a group of people who are very heavy users of Copo. So they tend to be quite adept at doing it, and it doesn't take them a very long time, which is a bit of a, I mean, you know, it's a bit of a wiggle, because obviously we'd like to be as user friendly as possible to the novice user. But we have found that we get this kind of like congregation of submissions from particular individuals. And yeah, so I think, you know, once you've done one submission, then you know, reusing those manifests is quite easy. So you take an existing manifest and you know, just adjust the few fields that are different. So that's another thing we could do. We could do more in terms of providing pro forma kind of partially filled manifests or example manifests. We tend to deal with very large data sets as well. So I mean, you know, it's we're talking, I don't know. So recently we had one that was about 6,000 1 gigabyte files. So, you know, they're quite large data sets. So I think in terms of the actual physicality of moving data around the place, that's always going to be a bit of a pain. So yeah, obviously there's going to be things that we can do to improve, you know, user experience, user interface. Yeah, so I saw a bit of a waffly kind of response there, but maybe it helped.
Oh yeah, that's perfect. Would we be able to open up the Zoom chat just so we can take some of the online questions? I saw there were a couple.
I actually have a question, Vida,
Oh.
with regards to our space. So, and it kind of relates to what Roy was saying. So, so you deposit to these kind of general purpose repositories like Dataverse. So how does, like, the metadata, I guess, is then set by the repository essentially? Whereas, so my approach with Copo has always been a kind of like user-centric one. So I like to talk to the communities and sort of see what they think is useful in terms of metadata, and then kind of see where I can link it to existing standards and then kind of take it from there. Whereas I guess if you're depositing to, like, you know, Dataverse or CCAN or whatever, then they have their own, I mean, I think is it Dublin core based, isn't it? So what would your response be to that, in that the utility of metadata, I think, is it could be defined by the users rather than the repositories?
Yeah, so there is currently work to generalize some of those generalist repositories metadata through like the Gray initiative. The way we do it, I guess, is that some metadata is better than none, and seeing it more as an iterative process. So say you might have a certain amount of fields that are kind of obviously needed for a deposit, and some of them you can kind of extract through the user without needing user input. So say their ORCID, if they set it up in our space, that's already there, you know, the title of the document, some other information. And so pushing all of that is already a good start. when it comes to user-defined metadata, yeah, I think, yeah, the issue there is like, well, do we need that to be structured, or are we fine with that being unstructured as long as it still travels along in some kind of even just text field across the kind of metadata journey until it gets to a tool or a stage of curation where there is that ability to really kind of structure it again. Yeah, I'd say it's always good to have something, even if it's messy or doesn't fit the schema perfectly, but then you can always clean it up versus just not recording it at all. I think that'd be my answer. Yeah, let me just quickly see. Okay, there's a question for you, Felix. Do you have a list of repositories connected to Copo which will accept data deposition directly?
I mean, I think they all do directly. But Copo's kind of, the idea is that we add this kind of high quality layer of metadata on top. And we don't necessarily submit all of that metadata to the repositories either. So we keep hold of the metadata record, although we delete the data file itself from our servers. So I guess I see ourselves as a kind of layer on top of the repositories, really. Like, you know, we're a broker. So yeah, you know, everything that we submit via, you know, public APIs. So it can all be done by the user, but we sort of, you know, we give the user a way of doing it without having to know how to, you know, call curl commands or you know, any sort of, we try to make it so that a complete novice can use it.
I have a question. That's a question I made. So I was thinking, because you gave a FASTAC data, sequencing data as an example. So in the US, most common data repository, if you're NIH funded, for example, is SRA, GEO, dbGaP and stuff. So I was wondering if US users can use your platform to submit directly to those repository. Also, you talked about omics data. So what about proteome exchange or metabolic workbench, that kind of stuff? Do you curate those data types as well and submit those repositories?
No, we don't do proteomics as yet. We initially we were going to, but the and also metabolomic data we were planning to do, but at the time when we had time to do it, the services themselves didn't have the APIs required for us to do it. I believe some of them do now, so that's certainly something we would be interested in revisiting. With regards to SRA, we don't submit directly to SRA. This is another thing that I mean, I think we've got a grant in at the moment with an American group to actually have some of these American repositories supported. Whether they get funded or not is anyone's guess. So it's on our radar. Any submission to the ENA does automatically get mirrored to SRA and the Japanese one as well. So they're all linked. But yeah, if your funding body specifically requires you to submit to SRA, then that's another enhancement we would have to make.
So it's I mean, they usually require user login because the authentication another one. So if you connect, you said if you submit to ENA through Copo and it's automatically submit to SRA, so you will get SRA accession number. Are we getting two different accession numbers?
Well, like I say, it goes to ENA for a start, so you would get the ENA accession number. I actually don't know what I don't know what the accessions once a submission from ENA is mirrored to SRA via the INSDC agreement. I don't know what the accessions look like, I'm afraid, on SRA.
Right. I mean, if it's an identical data set, you're going to have two different TID in a session number from ENA and then another session number from SRA, unless SRA takes ENA as session number. I don't know what the arrangement is. And then user, a lot of them have their user ID in SRA. If they use your platform, is there any way to link them, like through ORCID ID or something?
I'm not sure, I'm afraid. I suspect they share IDs. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to have two separate IDs, but I don't know. I really don't know, I'm afraid.
Okay.
All right. I'll maybe answer a couple of the quick fire RSpace ones. Is RSpace integrated with protocols IO? Yes. Do we use PIDs such as RRID or IGSN? Yes, we use IGSN for our IDs. We're working with them and we have like a spec as well of that, what an integration with that would look like. Can we scroll down? I think there were a couple more. Okay, does RSpace mandate ORCID ID for users? We don't mandate it, but that's something we're looking at so that it would be maybe a per server setting that the sysadmin could choose that each user would need to provide an ORCID ID, but we're also reworking our interface so that they would be very heavily nudged to set up their ORCID ID so that it would be kind of displayed everywhere and it would be made clear that, okay, you know, you should maybe set that up. Does RSpace create a new RO create or similar for workflow products? I would provide a single way to cite and reproduce an entire workflow. We do integrate and have like an RO create export. When it comes to citing and reproducing an entire workflow, we don't exactly have that, but we'd love to work with anyone that's able to describe what are the requirements of that and what that would look like. Things like provenance and so on is definitely like an important next step that we want to look at. One thing I want to do is maybe we can move to the Menti just so we have time to do that, and then we can go back to questions just because I think that they'd be really good to capture some of that. So I think it's in in the browser tab, if that's okay. I think we might have missed some questions, but I think we'll have the meeting chat, so we'll make sure to get back to those.
I'm sorry, I was writing, so I didn't hear whether you answered my question about does the RSpace mandate a sample measure modules of, RID or IGSN type of PID?
Yeah, so we don't mandate it, but you can just automatically you can click on a button and it will register an IGSN ID for a sample that you have in your sample management system, and you can edit the metadata from within RSpace and publish it, so it creates a landing page. So we do integrate with IGSN IDs. For RRIDs, we have a spec and we've been working with them, so we just need to kind of make the next step in implementing it, but we think it would look pretty similar as well. So we have been looking at PIDs. That's one of our big focuses just now. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for all the questions. That is a good thing to have. And now on the screen is the Mentimeter. This is my first time using it, so hopefully it goes well. Thank you for the free likes on this introduction slide. I will open my iPad because it has the little toggling thing so that I can switch the questions. Yes. Okay, yeah, so you can join either through menti.com and enter the little code, or you can scan the QR code on here. And all right. So when I was doing some data science in university, one of the tutors was like, never use a word cloud because it's actually terrible for like representing anything. It doesn't really give you much. So I've decided I would use word clouds for all of this. Just because it's like, just the language that people use is interesting. So yeah, I'd love for you to fill in just some of these. There's not that many of them, so just, yeah, put in whatever feels right. Okay. Let's see if there's any more. Okay, curation tools. data management and curation and metadata and vertical interoperability. That's good. We like to see it. Yeah, standards as well. Okay. Let's wait a little bit more if we get any more. Okay. Provenance, yeah, that's a big one. Cool. All right, I think I'll do the next one. What topics, if any, were missing that you expected to hear about, either from the session description or as we moved on to the discussion? Was there anything you thought, okay, actually this IG should probably think about this as well? Yeah. Human curation tools and also AI workflows, the two opposite ends. Compliance, yeah. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay, a lot more. Okay, data storage, PID integration, quality control, real-time streaming data. Okay. Crediting curation. Okay, yeah. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, I'll just wait a couple more seconds. So if anyone types quickly. Okay, review curation tools. Yeah. There's, for review curation tools, one of the presentations in the previous session at the above, Curation talked about a bit about that. Kjell Leuven has this nice tool that integrates with Dataverse that allows you to kind of comment on deposits, send them back to the person that made them. So that could be interesting to look at. Okay, perfect. Okay, and sloths as well. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. Should have used the RDA template slides. I really missed out on that. And let's see what's next. Oh, is that, no, that is not the one. That is not the, oh, there we go. What is a topic you would suggest for the IG to focus on first? So out of the ones we talked about, which one you think might either be the most well-defined or might have the most impact? If you were thinking of like the first year of the IG, what do you think we should really think about? Okay, reliability of PIDs. Complicated question. Curation support and tools. Yeah. Link with other curation IGs. Yeah, that's a good one. Curation tools. Yeah. Right. We'll maybe wait for one more response or so, and then we can. Small organizations, APIs. Yeah. Interoperability. Yeah, that all makes sense. Okay, so yeah, a lot to do with supporting, yeah, curation and tools, which makes sense. That is the name of the IG, so we're all consistent here. All righty. A bit of a specific question looking forward, but I think it's a good kind of thing to think about now is if you were thinking in the future, the IG produces some outputs, what actual format of output would be most helpful to you? Like maybe you want to read a 30-page report that has, you know, a size 10 font, and that is okay. But maybe like, do you want like a checklist to follow? Do you think a glossary would be useful? Do you think implementation examples would be useful? Like what would be useful for you? Okay, a little clickbaity top 10 something. We love that. Examples, yeah. Chat GPT summaries. Checklists, okay. Yeah, okay. Implementation examples, yeah. Definitions of curation, yeah. Toolkits. Okay, lots of ideas. It's good. Specs for tools. Okay, flow diagrams to follow. Yeah, so maybe kind of abstracting and summarizing an implementation profile into a flow chart. Success stories, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, quite a lot of these focus on implementation examples and parts of that. That's good. Inventory of tools. See capabilities and gaps. Life cycles. Okay. Every time a new answer appears, I'm like, wait, where is it? Like I can't find where it is. That's very stressful. Let's see. I think I mentioned all of these. Okay, yeah, this is really helpful, and I'm glad that, yeah, a cookbook, yeah. So just it seems like all of these are very kind of practice driven and precise, and that's good to know that implementation examples would be useful. Okay, cool. Let's see. I think that might be. Let's discuss. We already have done some of that, but let me check. We have a little bit over 5 minutes, so just wanted to take it back to the physical room, just check if anyone has any kind of thoughts, feelings, and yeah, yes. Oh, any thoughts or a feeling?
Not feeling, but I wanted to ask about the data site, person and you, that it is nice to have tools to help researchers and data curators and so on. The issue I'm concerned is that most of the case of the data, research data, have not only one beautiful life cycle, it goes and come back and fix and update it, even better data sets. If every time you give PID, PID does not necessarily point to the data sets that other research looking for, how do I find it? The one. So there is a concept of the version of the data sets, or enough information of the data is restricted, like most of the research paper might do. So that does data site registered service, does that function data set provide, or does our space has a concept, the more the PID service is connected between several services, which point of the service is responsible for the PID is a question. So how do you, what's your thought is to question, might be too long to answer.
Questions. I'll maybe ask Zheli to comment on the data site part.
Yeah, thank you for the question. That's a really good question. I think the research process is always it's never straightforward. It's always very convoluted. That cycle is like idealized a project life cycle, but not exactly how research is done. That I agree with you. From data science perspective, the data set infrastructure and which is like the metadata schema supports versioning of the PIDs, the DOI themselves, and it relies on the researchers to make that call when a minor change happens, or like the location of that data set changed, and that the data curator have the power to change, update the metadata behind the DOI to make sure the landing page is always the latest, like the DOI always resolve to the latest version of that data set. And if there is enough of a change, we actually recommend to have a new DOI registered for that version, that you deem this to be an improved version of that data set, and you have enough changes happened, you'll have a new DOI, but in the metadata, it relates to the previous version of the data set using a related identifier, and define that relation type. We do have this is previous version of, is a new version of relation type. And that way you can trace back to the previous version. And this also varies by the implementation on various platforms. Like, for example, Zenodo have this pretty particular implementation where you can where every record have like two DOIs, like one always land on the latest version, and then they give like on the landing page of the latest version, they give previous version DOIs, and that's how they manage the versioning. So, but we don't dictate how this implementation is done. It kind of depends on the community and the platform. So, for example, RSpace have his own implementation. Then I will let you explain that, Vida.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that you might have a lot of versioning happening internally that works one way, but then when you expose that in a kind of pitified way, it might not exactly correlate. And it's, yeah, I don't really have a good answer, I think. I think it also depends on the way an institution also functions. It might make sense for a specific tool or a specific part of the institution to have stewardship of the PIDs. And there's also a question of like, what does it mean to steward it? If there's several entities that can edit the PIDs, then there is a certain shared ownership, but maybe like who gets to make the call on like, yeah, all of these decisions, both policy-wise, but also technically in terms of what permissions are had. It seems that PIDs were mentioned quite a bit in the little Menti poll, so this might be a specific use case we want to explore of like, okay, implementation profile. If we take specifically your PIDs workflows, how does that look, right? So that might be quite interesting. Thank you for that question. That was good.
Sorry, particularly like this research data management, there are more than two roles involved. So the research paper, you know what you're writing, but research data, you know what you supposed to believe, but the next person, professional curator, may change it for the goodness, and then sort of then go given the PID, and then the first person may say, I wanted to add something else, which would more enrich the data set. So the pointing by PID, the content might be different. So once it's sort of using for evaluation or research paper to be published in the future, so you need to be very careful only by the person who is going to write papers. So that's so several roles involved service type. I found it extremely difficult to.
Can I add to that? I don't know if you guys can hear me. Can you hear me?
All good, yeah.
So I do curate data for our institutional data repository. So once PID is assigned, published, meaning make your data findable, and all the PIDs has a version control. So if if they want to make any changes, we accept that because we do have a manual creation process, and then every change is documented. So we use the data, digital commons data. They will actually highlight, use the AI to show the changes in color-coded fashion. We also document change control log, as an attachment. So it describe, because it won't go into the file. It will only show the metadata change, but it cannot detect any changes made to the file. So if you add a new file, it will show the new file is added. But if you make the change into existing file deposit to the repository, it won't show. Then they will be captured in the change log file. I'm sorry, I have to run to another meeting, but I just wanted to add to that one. Thank you so much. It was a great talk.
Awesome. Thank you for joining. And yeah, I think we're right on time. So I think I'll just, again, call to action you all to join the IG if you want to hear more. We'll make sure to write up some notes and so on and post the presentations. Thank you so much to our speakers. I loved also the fact that there were no technical difficulties. Like it was all so smooth. So thank you to our technical team. Yeah, awesome. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference and feel free to talk to me or to the other people who ask questions. And yeah.